The massive claws of the Xanthian Dreadmore ripped through the air, just inches from the human's exposed neck, as xenobiologist Jacob Evans calmly reached up to scratch behind the predator's segmented earplate. "By the gods, we're recording this, right? Command will never believe," Illyrian researcher Yaris began, before his partner Xyla cut him off with a frantic swat. "Shut up, you idiot. Any loud noise could startle the creature, though it does seem to be. Are my eyes malfunctioning, or is that thing enjoying the attention?" Yaris squinted, leaning forward despite his better judgment. It did seem like the monster was leaning into the human's touch, a low rumble building in its barrel chest. "If it is, the human is even crazier than I thought. I've seen a Dreadmore bite an armored convoy in half, without slowing down." The deadly creature's thick tail lashed back and forth as Jacob ran his hand along its jawline, a very human grin on the xenobiologist's face. The researchers watched, stunned, as the galaxy's apex predator slowly folded to the ground, rolling onto its side as the human began to enthusiastically rub its belly. We have to report this. Can you imagine the papers we could publish?" Xyla muttered in awe, brain already spinning with possibilities. If humans could reliably pacify the creatures, then Yaris seemed to reach the same conclusion, the implications staggering. "We need this human in a lab, now, before he gets bored and wanders off." He raised his communicator, calling their ship in orbit. "Get me Captain Mox. We have a human down here I need retrieved. Expedition protocol." He rattled off their coordinates, not taking his eyes off the human for a moment, barely remembering to breathe. If this ability could be studied, replicated, Yaris shivered. It would change everything. The future of the Illyrian people might well depend on the human and his impossible skill. Xyla's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled up his helmet camera's video feed, his heart pounding in his chest. He blinked several times, certain that the display must be glitching out, but the impossible scene remained unchanged. There was Jacob Evans, casually running his hands over the armored hide of a creature so lethal that even the most grizzled Illyrian soldiers would rather face a firing squad than encounter one in the wild. What is he doing? How is he not dead?" Xyla stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Yaris shook his head slowly, equally dumbfounded. "I have no idea. In all my years I've never seen anything like it. Every instinct in that Dreadmore's body should be screaming at it to rip him apart, but it's just sitting there like an oversized hatchling." Xyla zoomed in with his camera, trying to get a better look at Jacob's technique. The human's hands moved with a sure, practiced touch, finding spots that seemed to make the massive predator rumble with contentment. "Look, he's scratching it under the chin and along the jaw now, and it's rolling over to let him rub its belly. I didn't even know they had vulnerable spots there with that armored hide." Yaris's communicator chirped insistently, a voice from their research outpost demanding a status update. He quickly muted it, not wanting to risk drawing the Dreadmore's attention with the noise. Turning back to Xyla, he whispered, "This is incredible. That human is treating the most feared creature in the galaxy like it's just some household pet. But how did he know it wouldn't just bite him in half?" Xyla shook his head slowly, still recording the unbelievable scene playing out in front of them. "I don't know, but I bet every xenobiologist in the galaxy would give their eye teeth to find out. We need to get this footage back to base. The research implications are staggering." Yaris nodded, then froze as Jacob stood up, gave the Dreadmore a final pat and began walking directly towards their hiding spot. The two Illyrians exchanged a look of pure panic. The Illyrian scientists gawked at Jacob, slack-jawed. Yaris took off his glasses, wiped them on his shirt and put them back on, as if expecting the human to disappear. Xyla just stood there, mouth agape, camera forgotten in his hands. Jacob chuckled at their reactions. "I take it you guys have never seen a human interact with a Dreadmore before." Xyla finally found his voice. "Interact with? Mate, we've never seen anyone get within 100 meters of one and live to tell about it. How long did it take you to earn her trust, as you put it?" Jacob rubbed his chin thoughtfully. With Daisy, about 6 months, give or take. I started by observing from a distance, learning her habits and routines. Then I began leaving offerings of food at the edge of her territory. Gradually, I moved closer and closer each time. Yaris shook his head in disbelief. 6 months, incredible. And you said she's the matriarch? There are more of them? Jacob nodded. Oh yes, a whole pride. 11 adults and 6 juveniles at the moment. Dreadmores have a complex social structure with the matriarch at the top. Once I had Daisy's trust, the others were much more accepting of my presence. Xyla's scientific mind was racing, the research possibilities unfolding before him. A complex social structure. How much is known about their behavior in the wild? Mating habits, child-rearing, inter-pride dynamics? Jacob grinned, his eyes sparkling. Not nearly enough, that's why I'm here. These creatures are so much more than the mindless killing machines they've been made out to be. There's a whole rich world of behavior and ecology to study. Yaris glanced back at Daisy, who had rolled onto her back, legs splayed in the air. To think the most feared predator on Xanthia, and she's just a big scaly softy at heart. Dr. Evans, you have to let us interview you, run some scans, get you on record. This is a historic moment. Jacob held up his hands. Please call me Jacob, and I'm happy to share what I've learned on one condition. This stays in the scientific community for now. I don't want Dreadmore reserves turned into tourist traps or worse, hunting grounds. They deserve to be understood and respected, not exploited. Xyla nodded vigorously. Of course, we wouldn't dream of it. The Illyrian Science Academy has strict protocols around sensitive discoveries. You have our word. Jacob smiled, satisfied. In that case, let me introduce you to the family. I think you'll be amazed at what these magnificent creatures are really like once you get to know them. He turned and gestured for the gobsmacked Illyrians to follow. We have to be careful to present this ethically, Jacob said, his face growing serious. Dreadmores are still wild animals, and we don't want to give the wrong impression. Nobody should try to approach one without extensive training and precautions. Xyla nodded, his excitement tempered by responsibility. I completely agree. We'll make it very clear that your interactions are the result of months of careful study and trust building. The last thing we want is some misguided thrill-seeker getting themselves killed. Yaris chimed in. We can emphasize the need for respect and caution. Frame it as a lesson in understanding and appreciating these creatures, not trying to tame or control them. Jacob smiled, glad to be working with scientists who shared his values. Exactly. If we do this right, we could foster a whole new attitude towards Dreadmores and other misunderstood species. Imagine the conservation and research opportunities. The implications are staggering, Xyla agreed. Collaborating with you, Dr. Evans, we could rewrite entire textbooks on Xanthian ecology and xenobiology. Yaris pulled out his datapad, fingers flying over the screen. I'm drafting an outline for our joint paper right now. I think we should lead with your behavioral observations, then segue into our anatomical and physiological data. Compare and contrast Dreadmore social structures with other apex predators. Jacob leaned over to look, nodding. Good thinking. We can use that as a jumping-off point to discuss their ecological role and the importance of preserving their habitat. As the scientists huddled together, excitedly trading ideas and information, Daisy let out a soft huff. Jacob glanced over at her, a fond smile on his face. Looks like someone's ready for her afternoon nap. I should probably let you two get back to your camp, but I'm really looking forward to working together on this. It's not every day you get a chance to completely revolutionize an entire field of study. Xyla saved the video file and tucked his camera away, still shaking his head in amazement. I still can't believe what I saw today. Dr. Evans, you've just turned Xanthian biology on its head. Jacob grinned. Please call me Jacob. And I think this is just the beginning. Together we're going to change the way the galaxy sees Dreadmores, and maybe every other misunderstood creature out there. It's an exciting time to be a xenobiologist. With final handshakes and promises to be in touch soon, the Illyrian scientists began making their way back towards their encampment, minds buzzing with possibilities. Behind them, Jacob turned back towards Daisy, pulling a large chunk of synth meat from his pack. "All right, girl, dinner time. Then what do you say we go find the rest of your family?" Daisy's eyes gleamed as she heaved herself up to her feet, jaws already opening in anticipation of the meal. Jacob tossed her the meat and set off into the dense Xanthian underbrush, the massive Dreadmore matriarch padding along at his side like an oversized, scaly puppy. Behind them, the jungle-like foliage closed in, concealing the unlikely pair from sight. A new era of understanding between humans and Xanthia's most fearsome predators was dawning, and these three scientists were poised to be at the forefront of it all. The three scientists' excited chatter was cut short by the shrill beep of Yaris's communicator. His brow furrowed as he listened intently, the device pressed tight against his ear. After a moment, he lowered it slowly, turning to face Jacob and Xylar with a somber expression. "I'm afraid I have some very troubling news," Yaris said gravely. "A heavily armed group of poachers has been spotted in the area. We need to evacuate immediately for our own safety." Jacob's eyes widened with alarm. "Poachers? Here! What could they possibly be after way out in the middle of nowhere like this?" Xylar's face darkened. "Dreadmore hides and teeth," he spat bitterly. "They fetch an absolute fortune on the intergalactic black market. Exotic animal parts are always in high demand among the galaxy's criminal elite." Jacob felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "We can't let that happen," he said firmly, his jaw tight. "Daisy and her pride are too important to lose to a bunch of greedy, soulless criminals." Yaris nodded in solemn agreement. "I'll put in an emergency call for backup, but it's going to take some time for the authorities to mobilize and reach our position. We're going to have to find a way to stall the poachers ourselves in the meantime." Jacob's eyes flashed with determination. "I have an idea," he declared, his voice resolute. "Daisy trusts me. If I can lead her and the rest of the pride away from here, it might buy us the time we need for help to arrive." Xylar gaped at the human incredulously. "Are you insane?" he exclaimed. "You can't just go traipsing off into the wilderness with a pack of Dreadmores, no matter how much they might seem to like you. It's too dangerous." But Jacob was already on the move, striding purposefully back in the direction of Daisy and the lounging Dreadmores. "I have to try," he called back over his shoulder as he walked away. "You two get yourselves to safety and call for help. I'll do everything in my power to protect the pride." Yaris and Xylar could only watch in stunned disbelief as Jacob approached Daisy, crouching down beside the massive creature and speaking to her in low, soothing tones. To their absolute astonishment, the Dreadmore matriarch lumbered to her feet, falling into step beside Jacob as he began to lead her away. One by one, the rest of the pride rose to join their leader, forming a protective line behind the human as he guided them into the dense foliage. As the strange procession disappeared from view, Xylar turned to Yaris, his face etched with concern. "Do you really think he can do it?" the scientist asked quietly. "Lead them all to safety like that?" Yaris shook his head slowly, staring at the spot where Jacob and the Dreadmores had vanished into the undergrowth. "I honestly don't know," he replied. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's him. You saw the bond he has with those creatures firsthand. It defies all scientific explanation." Hours later, Yaris and Xylar paced back and forth restlessly at the evacuation point, watching the tree line with growing trepidation. Suddenly, a lone figure stumbled out from the foliage, limping heavily. It was Jacob, his clothes torn and bloodied, a look of utter devastation on his face. There was no sign of Daisy or the other Dreadmores. Xylar rushed to the human's side, catching him as he swayed on his feet. "Jacob!" he cried. "What happened out there? Where are the Dreadmores?" Jacob raised his head slowly, his eyes haunted. We ran into the poachers," he said hoarsely, his voice choked with emotion. "They opened fire on us without warning. Daisy, she charged straight at them. Bought me just enough time to get away. But—" His words trailed off as his composure crumbled, a sob escaping his throat. He turned away, shoulders shaking as he fought to regain control. Yaris stepped forward, resting a comforting hand on the grieving human's shoulder. No words were necessary. The heavy, leaden silence spoke volumes. After a long moment, Jacob straightened, his expression hardening with resolve, even as tears carved tracks through the grime on his face. "We have to stop this," he said, his voice low and fierce. "We have to make sure Daisy's sacrifice wasn't in vain. No more poaching, no more senseless slaughter of these incredible creatures." "Agreed," Yaris said solemnly. "We'll use every scrap of research and evidence we've gathered to force a change, no matter what it takes. The galaxy will know Daisy's story. Her memory will live on." As the rescue shuttle descended from the sky to carry them back to civilization, the three scientists stood united in their shared conviction. They would be the voice for the voiceless, the champions of the misunderstood. For Daisy, for all the Dreadmores, and for the human who had opened their eyes to the true nature of the beasts. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.